Hi, my name's David, and I would like to introduce you to the oboe, spelled O-B-O-E. It's a member of the woodwind family because it's often made of wood, like this one, but it can also be made of plastic. The oboe is also part of what they call the double reed family because the reed has two sides. You can't see, but it's hollow in the middle, and the two sides vibrate against each other to produce the very special sound. Oboes have been around for hundreds of years, but similar instruments were developed more than 2,000 years ago. We're considered one of the high woodwinds because of the notes we produce, and we often sit somewhere near the flute and the clarinet section. One of the neat things about playing the oboe is that usually there's only one or two or three people in a band or an orchestra that play this instrument, so it makes us kind of special, and we have a very special role. So like I said, the oboe's sound is actually caused by blowing into the reed that causes the vibrations to make the sound. Now, every single musical instrument requires some type of external force to produce the sound. Percussions, you have to hit on them or bang on them or shake them. With a piano, you have to touch the keys. With strings, you rub the bow against the strings. With brass, you're buzzing your lips, and that causes the sound. In the case of the oboe, this double reed vibrates, and it makes a sound. So even without the instrument, it still makes what we call a peep. And that's what causes the vibration to make the oboe play. So like I said, we have high notes and low notes. So I'm just going to play a scale just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like and the high and low range. Our reeds can be bought in a store. They can be bought from other oboists who know how to make their own, or some people actually choose to learn how to make the reeds all by themselves. I make my own reeds, and for me that's important because I like them to sound just a certain way. Now, if you look at the instrument, some people look at the keywork and they think, oh geez, that looks really, really complicated. Truth of the matter is the oboe isn't any more or less complicated than any other instrument if you're going to practice. Other thing about the oboe that's kind of special is we have a leadership role in the bands and in orchestras, because you will often hear before a concert, if you've ever seen one on TV with your parents or you ever been to a live concert, you'll hear one instrument give a note. It's called the tuning note, and everybody tunes to that note, and it's almost always the oboe. And when we give the tuning note, we'll often give it for different sections. So we'll give the tuning note for the winds first, then we'll give a tuning note for the brass, and then we give it again one final time for the strings in an orchestra. Or sometimes we'll give a note that's a little bit different for some of the brass called a B flat. Now, I have to say, I know that this is my instrument, so of course I'm going to say good things about it, but I really do think, honestly, that the oboe is a lot of fun to play because we get really good parts, and sometimes with little solos and little opportunities to be featured in the pieces that we play in both band and orchestra. Oboes can really be fun and playful, like in the way that they sound, like this particular piece that was written a couple of hundred years ago. Or it can actually be a little bit more mysterious sounding in the character of the music, like this particular part from Peter and the Wolf. Now, if you know the story of Peter and the Wolf, the flute plays the bird, the French horns play the wolf, the clarinet plays the cat, but the oboe plays the duck. And so that was the little tune from Peter and the Wolf that represents the duck. The other thing is that oboes can have a really pretty song-like quality. And so you will often hear oboes playing these really beautiful melodies, and not just in classical music or band or orchestra music, but sometimes there'll be even oboes in movie soundtracks or in pieces that are sung by pop musicians. So this is a song that you probably will recognize, and I'll tell you what it is after I play it. So if you remember that, that is from the movie Milan, the cartoon Milan, but it's also a song done by Christina Aguilera called Reflection, which is also from the movie Mulan. There's another song actually that you might have heard recently, but it actually comes from music from a while ago, and we'll see if you can recognize this particular one. So that is from The Sound of Music, which you may have watched with your parents, but it's also a song called Seven Rings from Ariana Grande, which you probably heard maybe last year. So there's a few other members of the oboe family. This certainly isn't the only one. There's this soprano oboe. There's one that's used in very old music called the oboe d'amore, which I don't have with me today. And there's a tenor member of the family called the English horn, which I do have with me today. And then there's also a bass oboe as well. So this is the English horn, and it's basically a bigger oboe. Now the English horn is so long that it has to have this little bent, what they call crook or bocal in the top of it. And it's actually interesting because it's not really English and it's not a horn. It is actually made in France and it's an oboe. So long story to that, which you can maybe Google and find out for yourself why the English horn was mistakenly called the English horn when it should have been called the angled horn because of the angle in the bocal. So the English horn has a reed just like the oboe has a reed, but the reed is a little bit different. It's a little bit bigger because it's a bigger instrument. This is my reed case, and this is where we often will store our reeds when you are playing the oboe, just so they don't break. So here's the English horn reed, and you may think, oh, it looks smaller than the oboe reed. But if you look at the wood part, you can see the wood part's bigger. And you see this has a cork on it. This doesn't have a cork on it, because really, if you take the bocal and you attach it to the English horn reed, that's really the entire reed. So you can see the difference in length between the two. So the English horn has a bigger sort of lower sound than the oboe, maybe a little bit more mellow. And I'm just going to play a few notes just to give you an idea. So people who play the oboe can also play the English horn, since it works basically the same way. But an interesting thing about orchestra and band music is not every piece of music that's written for band or orchestra has an English horn part. So you kind of have to play both so that you can have something to play. And so that's called doubling. And you may have learned about that in other videos from other musicians about doubling. But oboe and English horn is a very common set of instruments to double. Now, the English horn is probably my favorite instrument to play, just because I feel like the range, the sound, it just sort of all fits for me. So I do play oboe, but I really, really like playing English horn. And the other neat thing about the English horn is that the parts are really, really important when they do have them. So if someone's going to take the time to write a part, they do make sure it's important. And the other thing that's also interesting about English horn is that even in orchestra or in bands, there's usually only one person who's playing the part. So you get your own special, unique part. Now, one of the very most famous pieces that was ever written for orchestra was a piece called Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. Dvorak was a Czechoslovakian composer who came to visit America, and while he was here, he wrote a piece of music that really captures the spirit of America and all sorts of different cultures and sounds. And so he wrote, in the second part of that piece, he wrote a big, huge solo. It's one of the most famous solos for any instrument in the entire group of music that's ever been written for orchestra. And you may recognize the tune, you may not. After it was written originally, someone later decided to put words to it, and the name of the song was called Going Home. And that's kind of stuck. People just call it Going Home because it makes sense. It's going home, going home. So that's the English horn. Another interesting thing is that we also have parts in modern music. So for example, this particular piece, which you may recognize, has a really, really important English horn part. So you probably recognize that from the movie The Lion King. Can you feel the love tonight? One last thing before I go. I really hope that you will consider the oboe and its big brother, the English horn, when you make your decisions about instruments. Something that is kind of practical information is that the oboe is relatively easy to rent. It's not much more than one of the other standard instruments. And another interesting thing is that when you start to get to the medium and professional quality instruments, the high range of what you would spend on the best quality oboe is substantially lower than what you would pay for, say, a flute, which often is gold or platinum, or a violin or a bassoon. So the oboe is readily available for beginners and also really affordable on rent-to-buy programs and for professional quality instruments. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, if you felt like the sound was something that made you feel something or interested you, I hope that you will consider taking up the oboe. Thanks very much.